Hey there, guys. So this may be the first or the second compared to the two parts that I'm doing, but we're now in my home studio and talking about my compost project that I've been working on for the last year. So I am an avid composter, and usually I would be saving my food scraps and anything that can go away and be helpful to the environment in my freezer. So I save everything in my freezer, and then I gather that bag and I take it out. And I've been doing this for many years now. Take it out to the brown bins provided in New York City by the sanitation department here until recently when they suspended it. But luckily, I do have a friend that has a house and is composting in her backyard. So I am grateful to ride my bike over there and continue to do that. So for me, my work is always, like, even outside of the compost stuff, is always about growth and decay. So I really love that our environment, it can look a little ugly at times when thinking about, like, waterfronts and things that are washing up, and you have the effects on the organic material and how they start to decompose, while also simultaneously providing new growth. And whether that new growth is flowers or trees in a literal sense, of what new life is, if you will, in the spring, but also thinking about how things can decompose and also start in the environment to grow new life. So, like, for example, I did a lot of work in redwood forest, and I was really interested in that because I thought I was going to be super into just these enormous trees and what that means. But I found myself looking at the ground yet again. I'm always looking at the ground, looking at the ground and seeing how the trees that had actually fallen over, how they start to decompose and sprout new life. And so there was lots of moss and mushrooms and other fungus that were starting to grow, and some of them, symbiotic and parasitic relationships that can happen with that, but all being the circle of life. And so about a year ago, when I was doing my usual routine and just going to take out my compost, I looked at it and I realized that these were, like, becoming these beautiful frozen sculptures that can also serve as a self-portrait in a way, particularly in relationship to art history. But those still lifes usually are of things that are kind of positioned around, and not necessarily the things that are decomposing. But I think that there's a lot of beauty in that, because we as people are always constantly growing and decaying, and we're not in a constant state. And so when thinking about the idea of time, particularly now, I would say, like, what is time? We feel like we have a lot more time at our disposal these days, but at the same time, now I'm just using that word, but at the same time, we don't, because, like, we don't know how to necessarily manage that time and how to navigate it. So I had started this pre-COVID, looking at these little worlds and how that's another form of the circle of life. And now during the whole COVID experience and not being out in the environment and not being able to travel and to go different places to see how that happens in the world, that I can look at that internally. And I do think that, it all goes back to then much more of a literal sense than I had worked previously, of the things that we eat, our world around us can serve as metaphor for us in general, of, like, we're constantly changing, we're constantly in flux, and sometimes that can seem terrible, but, how can we try to find some beauty in that abstraction of time? So I'm in my home studio right now, and I'm going to try to not make you too dizzy, but I'll go closer up to some of these examples of things that I've been working on a lot more frequently now that I am home so much. So I'm always really interested in using a variety of materials. So in this one in particular, there's a lot of different Conte. There's some pencils that are underneath there, as well as markers and watercolor. And I think that even if I'm not working on paper and I'm working on panel, for example, that I always am drawing, even if I'm using acrylic paint or oil paint, I'm always drawing with it because I am really interested in line and how you can use line to show different textures um, and different layers. So, like if you were to paint a form, for example, like some of these are getting a little bit thicker down here. But some of the forms become, there's such more of an objecthood to it, but I'm really interested in layers in my work and trying to show the different layers that are happening because it also then becomes another layer of time and demonstrating that in a two-dimensional surface. And some of them can be thicker and some of them are quicker. And so when you're working with different layers, it is really, it's a real opportunity to show the layers that came before and how that can be useful in understanding space in itself. And I'm going to turn around for a couple here. This is my supplies. And for a couple of different works over here. So a lot of times I had started with doing a lot of compositions that were centralized and thinking about how there are these like little mounds and start to become mountains. But then there are also these entities, right? So they're kind of like islands. I did a lot of work with islands in the past. And thinking of how that also can serve as something to think about with how we are as individuals. No man is an island, and thinking about an archipelago and how things start to, land can break off, but they're still going to have connections and flora and fauna that exist between one and the other. So I think that helped with my understanding of like first creating these compositions, and in a way also was about the individual. So it's one person in these. But I have started exploring a lot more, and I think that that is always important of thinking about sometimes maybe it is a single object that has a border around it, and sometimes it starts expanding, and that during this time now, and I'm basically with my food creating little landscapes in themselves. So that'll be it. Sorry for those last few beeps, but I don't want to do another take of this because this was like 6 because I'm not tech savvy. I hope this was useful, and please ask any questions that you may have.